Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers from 1988. I've always viewed this one as kind of the corporate reboot Halloween movie. Carpenter and Deborah Hill are not involved. The producer of this film, or the financer really of the original Halloween film, and an executive producer on a lot of them, Mustafa Akkad, wanted to basically rejuvenate the Halloween franchise. It kind of came down to basically the Cannon Group, after having success with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, wanted to do a similar thing with Halloween and bring Carpenter and Deborah Hill back. And they did actually produce a screenplay, which they didn't like. And Carpenter and Deborah Hill sold their rights to it. And so this felt like Halloween without Carpenter, and basically sort of any slasher movie. Now, 1988 wasn't the high point of slasherdom. 1988, it was sort of kind of ending the slasher thing and almost over, because Freddy Krueger had happened. We were getting more into fantastical horror. There were still lots of cheap horror movies in the 80s. There were tons of Friday the 13th sequels. And doing kind of a corporately approved, none of the creative entities Halloween film immediately, I think, isn't something I'd personally be as into. But I've tried to watch this because I know some people say, oh, but Halloween 4, it is all those things, but it's sort of good at it. And I'm like sort of with them, because sure, it's better than 5 and 6 and other of the sequels, but it's not really like that good. Although there's good ideas in it. That's the one thing about Halloween 4. It has a killer ending, which, if had been led to correctly and set up correctly, could have been even cooler. It is trying to be more of a simple slasher film, but it kind of shows you why so many directors and writers aren't as good at making a more simple plotted film. Halloween is very much that, but what John Carpenter is, he was under the theory of like deconstruction, and to really boil this down to absolutely anything you would need. He's very economical, and that's one of the things that's beautiful about Carpenter and amazing about the first Halloween, and even sort of the second one. But what Dwight H. Little, with a screenplay by Alan B. McElroy and a story by a whole list of other people. Although you can tell he likes the series, even the writer of this film commented that he loves seeing the first one. Like, the girl he took to the first one was like freaking out the whole time and climbing all over him, and he had a fun time at the second one. He jumped at the chance. He was kind of a B-movie writer, and this was made by B-movie people, but they didn't seem to understand. They're more interested in the Mike Myers being in Haddonfield and being loose than they were in actually the story and the mythos of it, which they also wanted to have as well. Which is you can't pretend to have both and not do one really well. And I think, the real natural kind of thing of this movie is it goes after the scares, the terror of him being loose in Haddonfield, right? But since you're just chasing that, but not really chasing the characters as much, but also sort of wanting to set up this mythos. Now, the character of Jamie Lloyd, played by Danielle Harris, who is named after Jamie Lee Curtis, which is lame and really obvious. So you couldn't call her Lee, you had 3 names there. The whole thing with her character, I think, is interesting, but they don't really build to it. At the beginning they do, but as soon as Michael Myers comes to Haddonfield, it's let's forget about that till the really cool ending. If they had that going throughout, I would have been this is an interesting idea. I don't like the whole Michael Myers killing relatives kind of idea. It's stupid, but I would have been at least with you. I would have met you halfway there. But especially because the whole idea of spoilers for the ending is that Jamie Lynn kind of does a recreation of the opening shot of the original Halloween, and they reveal killers go through the bloodline and so forth. But the rest of the movie doesn't set that up at all. It's just a sudden thing at the end. You're ugh. And you get sort of that they have a psychic link, which happens in a later movie, but they don't really get into it. They kind of hint at all these things, but then don't go into them. And that is such a failure. It's such a cool idea. I honestly wish someone would remake Halloween 4, because I think there is a good movie in Halloween 4, and it kind of peers out sometimes. And I think that's why people think these certain scenes are a good movie, but it's it's not. So. And the whole idea of bringing back the virgin babysitter thing, but they do it in more of an 80s kind of a way. And I even think one of the things that's sad and sort of interesting is the way they use the female characters in this film versus how they use them in Halloween. In Halloween, they're very fleshed out. You actually have a female writer credited in this. I don't know the genders of everyone who wrote the story on this, but at least the screenplay isn't written by a woman. But pretty much everything that the character of Rachel says is about either her boyfriend or Michael Myers. So this film would probably fail the Bechdel test. I'm pretty sure. I think she might have enough conversations to like get a little bit of a pass, but it's just really annoying because certainly Jamie Lee Curtis did talk about guys she liked and things like that, or Laurie Strode or whatever. In this, it's just like she has no room for anything else. In fact, I know virtually nothing about this person other than she's a nice older sister at points, I guess, to Jamie Lloyd, and she likes her boyfriend. That's not personality. And she has parents. Yeah. So basically, she is Laurie Strode in this, but like she's such a cipher. It's like, why does she even exist? And even her boyfriend is a guy who works at drugstore. And you could say, but Jim, you just said deconstruction and all that stuff. The difference between that is Laurie Strode, it's like, oh, she does well in school. She has a connection to Tommy. She'll stay up and watch scary movies with him. She brought a jack-o'-lantern to being a babysitter. In this, it's like, she went trick-or-treating and yeah. And then there's like this teenage soap opera drama nonsense with like her boyfriend. None of the teenage characters are interesting. And this is Halloween. They were notorious for the first one being incredibly good at teenage characters, and this one is horrible at it. Like the actress who plays Rachel, Ellie Cornell, does a good job with like nothing basically. And I think a lot of them, like, you sort of want to follow them, but I was also like sort of like, oh no, Brad? What's his name? It's like I don't even give a shit now. It's like Brady, maybe? Is it Brady? I had no connection. Whereas in Halloween, it's like when someone says Laurie Strode, I like instantly have a connection to that. It would be not fair to say, oh, well, they're not as good as Laurie Strode because, yeah, duh. But also, it's like they don't even approach that. You know, they're basically being like, hey, we have to do a slasher movie in the 1980s. You know, you have kids, they have a job, who gives a shit, whatever. And that's sort of like what this movie does for the most part. You know, it's mainly about like trying to have Michael Myers be free in Haddonfield again. I do like the whole plotline with the beer guzzling guys in the bar, which never comes up in the previous ones and doesn't really lead to that much. It's sort of like, okay, like why have them in here? I don't get it. Like, I mean, it's Illinois, so it's like, it's probably the most Illinois thing any of these films have ever done. One of them goes like, hey, his son died in the last one, and I'm like, which one? Like, I'm sure there's a Halloween fan who knows, and if you do, please tell me in the comments, because I didn't find it in there. Okay, like, that's interesting, and I get like why they would think that, but I love that they called the police and like, the police aren't answering, something's wrong. And I'm like, okay, white people, okay. And by the way, they didn't stay on the phone very long. It's like, you know, maybe give the cops like time to get out of the shower to answer the phone or something. I mean, I think the main thing with this film is it just feels like any slasher film. And sure, it's like better at being just any slasher film than most, but that's like not really good enough. And it's also a sad state of affairs that the Halloween franchise had to keep going and had to sort of become this. This is such an overreaction to Halloween 3. Halloween 3 was like, let's not have Michael Myers. Michael Myers died in an explosion in 2. 3 did piss people off. You get to Halloween 4, they literally have in the title the return of Michael Myers, and then you get a lot of like, Michael Myers is in this one tagline things, because it's first the return of Michael Myers, then it's the revenge of Michael Myers, then it's the curse of Michael Myers. These are the only 3 that have Michael Myers in them. They're kind of like a dumb trilogy, I guess. I don't really get why they felt so compelled to overreact to Halloween 3, and this is sort of like almost like what James Bond overreaction in terms of franchise, between a film that didn't do as well to like reboot it. And this was a big reboot. They couldn't get Jamie Lee Curtis back when the Carpenter kind of ghost story thing script didn't work out. They didn't go with that, and so they're like, well, we're just going to do the Halloween that like a studio executive would love. And in some ways, yeah, it definitely is that. It's the corporate 80s. They're making sequels like crazy. They want to print money, and Halloween's a property, and you have horror movies and Friday the 13th films like making X amount of dollars, and Halloween's sort of just sitting there on a shelf. Of course, you're going to want that franchise to be something more. And this was probably the biggest attempt to do that and kind of give it more films. And I don't really think that was the wisest idea artistically. Commercially, I sort of see where they're coming from, but they could have at least made a good commercial movie, and instead they make like a kind of such a middle of the road paint by numbers Halloween film. It's like decent, like I don't mind watching it, to be honest, but it's just sort of like just there. This is a good film for a double feature because it doesn't really impact you emotionally or scare you or anything, so you're just like, emotionally I'm a blank slate after that, so I can just sort of watch anything. And then there was even a sequel like directly the next year, you know, and it just felt like they really wanted to cash in, since Friday the 13th had been able to do that for so long, and this was sort of the end of the, you know, peak franchise. Really, they really kind of came late to the party, but they had to have, you know, almost like a perfectly streamlined slasher film, and they do that, but they do that at the expense of like actually making a good movie, actually having good characters. And, you know, obviously Loomis, who's not coming back at this point, but is in this and does an over-the-top performance, which is wonderful. And I love the weight of Michael Myers and everything like looms over him. I think is like Donald Pleasance is really good at doing that while also doing so much scenery chewing. It's ridiculous. It's interesting he would come back, but it seems like he's almost having fun with it in a weird way. But Halloween 4 is just really kind of, to me, the problem with Halloween as a franchise versus a movie, in that it never really was supposed to be a franchise, and it being a franchise kind of like doesn't work within the theories of the original film, that it's the shape, but it just kind of goes on and everything like that. And there really hasn't been a film that understands taking on the shape. You know, it did what most bullshit horror franchises do, and like get into backstory and like, oh, how does this continue? And they're like, oh, well, his second cousin is in town or some crap, and like, I'm supposed to care. What all these franchises end up doing is like over explaining things so it's less scary, because what was scary about the first Halloween is you really didn't know why he was doing this. He was just going off and killing people, and it felt random and scary and spooky. And in this, you're like, you know why he's doing it, and it's explained. And I don't know how everyone knows that Michael Myers is her uncle. Like that I would like explained, actually, because it felt like it was just something like people in the know knew or something, and too, but then suddenly it's like, would they print that in the paper? Maybe they could explain that. This feels like what the problems with that genre ended up being, where you have boobs in it, you have a lot of violence in it, you have, you know, female characters who are basically nothing but also the main characters at the same time. You have an over explanation of the killer. This feels very much post Jason Lives, which is a great Friday the 13th film, but this like took all that sort of literally. It does sort of some things with like the safeness of suburbia and things like that, but none of these ideas are fleshed out. The main thing about this is having Michael Myers stab people, and as long as he's doing that, the producers and everyone else were kind of okay with it. And this was looked at in the public sense, in the court of public opinion, and people who wanted a Halloween 4, that this was kind of a nice return. But I think this is, you know, like most of times when Halloween does return, I'm hoping not with the 2018 film, but we'll see, it's definitely a thing where you look at it and sort of wish maybe it didn't return and we could just safely stay with the spookiness and the terror and the horror of the original, and not have to like regurgitate this and have Halloween almost pay for the penance that the slasher genre would become. It feels like Halloween 4 had to do this because that's what the slasher genre had become by 88, and it had become one of those. It had to be what it had influenced and what it had wrought, even if it really isn't that film's fault. It's everything that came after, and Halloween 4 unfortunately has to return to sort of help lay claim to it, even if it's so bland. It's really doing absolutely artistically nothing. So if you have seen Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this was day 1 of my Halloween week of videos, which I traditionally do every year. It's basically just 5 horror movie reviews I usually do leading up to Halloween because of how dates work out and time and scheduling and so forth. There will still be 5 reviews of horror movies, but 2 are Halloween related. One is Suspiria, and then there's 2 others, but they will come out all before Halloween, and the last one coming out on Halloween. Just there won't be 5 leading up to it. I've said this before, but just in case you're wondering. But this is day 1. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.